Ambassador Zarathel stood before the massive viewport of her flagship, watching the human fleet maintain its formation just beyond the asteroid belt. For 3 cycles, the Valdorian Empire and humanity had been locked in a brutal war that was bleeding both civilizations dry. The humans had proven far more resilient than anyone in the Galactic Council had predicted. The sleek Valdorian cruisers, with their elegant curves and crystalline energy cores, looked almost delicate compared to the blocky, industrial human ships. Yet those ugly vessels had held their ground against superior technology for longer than any species in recorded history. The humans called them brick ships, crude, heavily armored, and seemingly held together with determination and stubbornness. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the human diplomatic vessel," her communications officer announced, his scaled hands dancing across the control panel. Lieutenant Kex had served under her for 5 years, and she had never heard uncertainty in his voice until this war began. "Put it through," Zarathel replied, smoothing her ceremonial robes. As the lead diplomatic representative of the Valdorian Empire, she carried the authority to negotiate on behalf of Emperor Thane himself. This meeting could end the war that had already claimed millions of lives on both sides. The viewport shimmered and transformed into a communication screen. A human appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and eyes the color of deep space. He wore a simple military uniform, dark blue with minimal decoration. Admiral Marcus Chun, according to her briefing files. "Ambassador," Chun said with a slight nod. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Admiral," Zarathel responded, studying his face for any sign of weakness. Humans were notoriously difficult to read, their emotions hidden behind masks of discipline. "My Emperor grows weary of this conflict. Perhaps it is time we discuss terms." Chin's expression remained neutral. "We're prepared to discuss a ceasefire, but our terms are non-negotiable. Complete withdrawal of Valdorian forces from human space, recognition of our territorial sovereignty, and reparations for the colonies you've bombarded." The audacity of the request made Zarathel's spine stiffen. "You realize you're losing this war, Admiral? Our technology is superior. Our fleet outnumbers yours 3-1. And yet here we are, 3 years later, and you're the one calling for negotiations." Chin's voice remained calm, but she caught something in his eyes, not fear or desperation, but a quiet confidence that unsettled her. Before she could respond, her tactical officer's voice cut through the tension. "Ma'am, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures. Something's coming through the jump gate." Zarathel felt her blood chill. The jump gate that connected this system to the core of Valdorian territories had been heavily fortified. Whatever was coming through had either destroyed those defenses or— "Admiral," Chun said, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. "Are you expecting reinforcements?" "No," Zarathel whispered, then, louder, "Commander, identification of incoming vessels?" Her tactical officer's face had gone pale beneath his scales. "Ma'am, it's the Hegemony. A full battle fleet. They're moving to attack positions." The Hegemony, the ancient empire that had ruled half the galaxy before going dormant for centuries. If they had awakened and were moving against both human and Valdorian forces. Chin's image leaned forward. "Ambassador, I'm reading the same signatures. My xenobiology team confirms Hegemony vessels, ancient design, but fully functional. Whatever's happening here, our war just became irrelevant." Zarathel watched as the dark ships emerged from the swirling energy of the jump gate. They were massive, geometric structures that seemed to absorb light itself. The Hegemony had been legend, stories told to young Valdorians about the empire that had conquered worlds with technology that bordered on mystical. "Ma'am," her communications officer said urgently, "the Hegemony fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies." The transmission crackled through the static, a voice that sounded like grinding metal and distant thunder. "Inferior species. Your conflict disturbs the order. Submit to Hegemony rule, or face extinction. You have 1 solar day to comply. Chen's voice cut through her shock. Ambassador, with respect, we have a bigger problem than our territorial disputes. My intelligence suggests the hegemony views both our species as pests to be eliminated. Zarathel looked at the tactical display showing 3 distinct fleets, Valdorian, human, and the growing hegemony formation. Her empire's ships were the most advanced, sleek vessels powered by crystalline technology that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. The human ships looked crude in comparison, metal boxes with primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons. But the hegemony ships, they defied easy categorization. Some are larger than small moons, others twisted through space in ways that hurt to look at directly. Admiral, she said slowly, what do you propose? Temporary alliance. Pool our resources, share intelligence. Fight them together until we can figure out how to send them back to whatever hole they crawled out of. Her advisors would call it treasonous. The Emperor had specifically ordered the complete subjugation of humanity. But looking at those alien geometries moving with impossible grace through space, Zarathel realized that pride might be a luxury they could no longer afford. There would need to be formal agreements, she said carefully. Treaties, guarantees. There's another option, Chun said, and something in his tone made her focus completely on his face. A personal guarantee between our peoples. Something that would carry weight in both our cultures. What kind of personal guarantee? Chun was quiet for a long moment. A marriage alliance. You marry a human representative. I marry a Valdorian one. Create bonds between our species that go beyond politics. The suggestion was so outrageous that Zarathel's first instinct was to laugh. Marriage between species was not unheard of in the galaxy, but between enemies? During a war? Yet as she looked at the hegemony fleet beginning to separate into attack formations, she realized that conventional solutions might not be enough. The Valdorian Empire had detailed records of the last hegemony expansion. Entire civilizations had simply vanished. You would be willing to marry one of my people? She asked. If it means saving both our species, yes. The question is whether you'd be willing to do the same. Zarathel closed her eyes, thinking of her duty to her people, to her empire. When she opened them, Admiral Chun was still watching her with that unsettling, calm confidence. Very well, she said. I will marry a human representative. But know this, Admiral. If this is some elaborate deception, if you betray this alliance, I will personally ensure your species remembers the error for whatever brief time they have left. She nodded seriously. Understood. I'll marry your designated representative under the same terms. As if summoned by their agreement, another voice cut through the comm channels, this time from the hegemony fleet. Inferior species, your time decreases. 18 hours remain for compliance. Admiral, Zarathel said, who did you have in mind for this marriage alliance? Chen's smile was small, but genuine. Actually, Ambassador, I was thinking the alliance would work best if the highest-ranking representatives from each side took the pledge. That would be you and me. The statement hung in the space between their ships like a challenge. Marry the enemy admiral to save both their peoples from an ancient threat that made their current war look like a children's game. Zarathel looked once more at the hegemony ships, their impossible angles cutting through space with deadly purpose. Her people had always prided themselves on their logic, their ability to make rational decisions under pressure. Very well, Admiral Chun, I accept your proposal. When and where do you suggest we conduct this ceremony? My ship can dock with yours in 6 hours. We can have the ceremony performed by representatives from both our cultures, broadcast to both fleets. Make it official. As the communication ended, Zarathel stared out at the 3 fleets positioned for what could be the last battle any of them would ever fight. In 6 hours, she would marry a human she had met only moments ago, allying with a species she had been trying to destroy just to face a threat that dwarfed them all. Her aide, a young Valdorian named Lyra, approached hesitantly. Ma'am, are you certain about this course of action? Zarathel touched the ceremonial blade at her side, a symbol of her family's honor and her authority as an imperial ambassador. No, Lyra. But I'm certain that conventional approaches won't work against the hegemony. Sometimes survival requires choices that seem impossible. As her ship began moving toward the rendezvous point with Chen's vessel, Zarathel wondered what kind of man she was about to marry, and what kind of war they were about to fight together. The docking procedure took longer than expected. Valdorian ships used elegant magnetic coupling systems that created seamless connections between vessels. Human ships, Zarathel discovered, used what Admiral Chen cheerfully called aggressive mechanical persuasion, essentially ramming an extendable tube between ships until the seals locked tight. "Very human," she muttered as the metal tube connected with a sound like controlled thunder. Her aide Lyra jumped at the noise, her scales shifting to an alarmed blue-green pattern. "Ma'am," Lyra whispered, "what if this is all an elaborate trap? Humans are known for their deception tactics." Zarathel smoothed her formal diplomatic robes, deep purple with silver threading that denoted her imperial rank. "Then we'll learn firsthand why they've survived this long against our superior technology." The airlocks cycled open, and Admiral Chun stepped through accompanied by two humans. One was clearly military, a woman with short red hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to violence. The other wore civilian clothes, but had the careful, observant eyes of a diplomat or intelligence officer. Chun himself moved with an easy confidence that Zarathel found simultaneously reassuring and unsettling. For someone about to enter an arranged marriage with an alien enemy during an existential crisis, he seemed remarkably calm. "Ambassador," Chun said with a slight bow that somehow managed to be respectful without being subservient. "Thank you for agreeing to this arrangement. May I present Colonel Sarah Martinez, my military advisor, and Dr. James Wright, our xenocultural specialist." Dr. Wright stepped forward with what Zarathel was learning to recognize as a human smile. "Ambassador, I've studied Valdorian customs. I believe we can create a ceremony that honors both our traditions while establishing the legal bonds necessary for the alliance." "Proceed," Zarathel said, though she noticed Chin studying her with those dark eyes. What did he see when he looked at her? An enemy? A potential ally? A problem to be solved? Dr. Wright consulted a tablet covered in notes. Valdorian marriage ceremonies traditionally involve the sharing of ancestral waters and the binding of family blades. Human ceremonies often include vows spoken before witnesses and the exchange of rings or other tokens. "The hegemony fleet has moved closer," Colonel Martinez interrupted. "We're down to 15 hours before their deadline." Chen nodded. "Then we keep this simple but meaningful. Dr. Wright, what's the minimum ceremony that would be legally binding for both species?" "The sharing of water and blades from the Valdorian side, spoken vows from the human side. If we can get representatives from both fleets to witness via video link." "Do it," Zarathel said. The practical side of her appreciated the efficiency, but part of her was oddly disappointed. On Valdora, marriage was a celebration that lasted 3 days, filled with music and ancient rituals that connected families across generations. Chen seemed to sense her thoughts. "Ambassador, after we deal with the hegemony, we can have a proper ceremony if you'd like. This is about survival, not romance." His directness was both refreshing and slightly insulting. "Of course. Though I should warn you, Admiral, Valdorian marriage bonds are considered permanent. Even if this is purely political, there are certain expectations, such as loyalty, protection of one's spouse's interests, defense of their honor. Betrayal of a marriage bond is considered one of the highest crimes in our culture." Chen's expression grew serious. "Good to know. The same applies here. I take my commitments seriously, political or otherwise." Within the hour, they had assembled a makeshift ceremony in the conference room of Chen's ship. The human vessel was utilitarian compared to Valdorian elegance, metal walls, harsh lighting, everything designed for function over beauty. Yet there was something appealing about the directness of it. Zarathel had brought sacred water from the springs of Valdora Prime, and her family's ceremonial blade, its crystal edge gleaming with inner light. Chen had procured simple gold rings from the ship's fabrication unit and prepared what Dr. Wright assured her were traditional human vows. The ceremony began with both fleets watching via communication links. Hundreds of thousands of Valdorian and human military personnel witnessing their leaders bind themselves together in marriage to face an ancient enemy. The water represents the flow of life between families, Zarathel said as she poured the sacred liquid into 2 cups. By sharing it, we accept responsibility for each other's well-being. She drank first, tasting the mineral complexity that reminded her of home, then handed the cup to Chun. He drank without hesitation, though she noticed his eyes widen slightly at the taste. The blade represents the cutting away of old loyalties to make room for new ones, she continued, drawing her family weapon. The crystal edge hummed with energy as she made a small cut on her palm, then held it out to Chun. He took the blade carefully. I've never used a crystal weapon before, he admitted. Press gently. It will cut deeper than you expect. Chun made the cut, his face showing only slight concentration. They pressed their palms together, mixing their blood as ancient Valdorian custom demanded. Now the human vows, Dr. Wright prompted. Chun turned to face Zarathel fully, his injured hand still pressed to hers. I, Marcus Chun, take you, Zarathel of House Valdora, as my wife and partner. I promise to stand with you against all threats, to honor your people as my own, and to defend our alliance with my life. The words were simple, but something in his tone made them feel weighty, significant. Zarathel found herself responding with equal formality. I, Zarathel of House Valdora, take you, Marcus Chun, as my husband and ally. I bind my honor to yours, my strength to your cause, and my loyalty to our shared survival. Dr. Wright cleared his throat. By the authority vested in me by the Human Colonial Alliance and witnessed by both fleets, I pronounce you married under the laws of both species. May this union bring strength to face the coming storm. As they exchanged rings, Zarathel felt an odd sensation, not the mystical bond that Valdorian poetry described, but a strange sense of rightness. This human was now her husband, her ally, her responsibility. Ma'am, Colonel Martinez said urgently, the hegemony fleet is moving. They're approaching attack positions. Chun immediately shifted into command mode. All stations, red alert. Prepare for combat. Ambassador, Zarathel, we need to coordinate our fleets. Moving to the tactical display, they watched as the hegemony ships arranged themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The formations seemed to follow mathematical principles that made no sense to conventional military thinking. They're targeting civilian populations first, Zarathel observed, reading the trajectory plots. Not military assets. They want to break our will to fight. That's a mistake, Chen said quietly. How so? Chen's smile was sharp, predatory. Because targeting civilians just gave me permission to show you what humans do when we're truly angry. He activated the fleet-wide communication. All ships, human and Valdorian vessels, this is Admiral Chun. As of this moment, we are no longer enemies. We are family, bound by marriage alliance and common cause. The hegemony has declared their intention to exterminate both our peoples. His voice carried across the combined fleet with absolute authority. This is what humans call a teaching moment. We're about to demonstrate why our species doesn't stay conquered, why we end empires instead of serving them. All ships, implement Protocol 7. Zarathel frowned. Protocol 7. Something we developed during our war with your people, Chun explained, his fingers dancing across the tactical controls. We studied every hegemony engagement on record, analyzed their technology, their tactics, their psychology. We've been preparing for this fight for longer than you might think. The human ships suddenly began moving in ways that defied everything Zarathel knew about space combat. Instead of maintaining formation, they scattered like seeds on the wind, each vessel moving on an apparently random trajectory. They look disorganized, she observed. That's the point. Hegemony tactics rely on predicting enemy movements, overwhelming them with superior positioning. But you can't predict chaos. As she watched, the scattered human ships began revealing their true purpose. What had looked like random movement was actually an incredibly complex dance, each vessel moving to create overlapping fields of fire while presenting the smallest possible target profile to the enemy. Valdorian fleet, Chen continued over the comm. Your ships are faster and more maneuverable than ours. We need you to be our scalpel while we're the hammer. Zarathel understood immediately. All Valdorian vessels assume escort positions, protect the human ships during their attack runs, and exploit any openings they create. The Hegemony fleet moved to engage, their massive ships gliding forward with stately menace. The first exchange of fire lit up the space between the fleets like a miniature star. Human kinetic rounds, simple chunks of metal accelerated to enormous speeds, punched through Hegemony shields that had effortlessly deflected Valdorian energy weapons. The ancient ship's armor was apparently not designed to handle such primitive but effective weapons. How is that possible? Zarathel breathed. Chen's grin was fierce. Because they're fighting the last war. Their defenses are calibrated for energy weapons, gravity manipulation, exotic matter. They never prepared for someone to just throw rocks really, really hard. But the Hegemony adapted quickly. Return fire began scoring hits on human ships, and those crude metal boxes started dying in brilliant flashes of light. Zarathel watched readouts, showing human casualties mounting by the second. They're dying to protect worlds they've never seen, she realized. That's what humans do, Chen said simply. We die for strangers, fight for people we'll never meet. It's what makes us dangerous. As the battle raged, Zarathel began to understand something that chilled her. The human fleet wasn't just fighting, they were learning. Each exchange of fire was analyzed, cataloged, turned into new tactics. Ships that survived enemy attacks immediately transmitted their survival techniques to the rest of the fleet. The Hegemony had awoken expecting to face the same species they had conquered millennia ago. Instead, they had found humanity, a species that turned every defeat into a lesson, every loss into fuel for vengeance. And now, through marriage alliance, that terrible human gift for warfare was allied with Valdorian technology and tactics. Zarathel, Chun said, using her name instead of her title for the first time, it's time to show the Hegemony why their empire fell the first time. What do you mean? Chen's smile was cold as space itself. It's time to teach them what happens when you threaten humanity's family. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when Zarathel discovered what Chen meant by showing the Hegemony why empires fall. The human tactical approach was unlike anything in her military education. Valdorian strategy emphasized elegant solutions, using superior technology and precise movements to achieve victory with minimal losses. Human strategy, she was learning, was built on controlled chaos and acceptable atrocity. Chun, she said, using his first name as he had used hers, your ships are deliberately taking damage they could avoid. Why? He stood at the tactical display, his face illuminated by the red glow of emergency lighting. Around them, his crew worked with calm efficiency even as reports of human ship losses continued streaming in. We're gathering data, he explained. Every shot the Hegemony takes at us tells us something about their weapons, their targeting systems, their reaction times. My people are dying to create a tactical database that will let us kill them more efficiently. The casual way he said made her scales shift color involuntarily. That's monstrous? Yes. Also effective. Watch the casualty ratios. She looked at the tactical display more carefully. At the beginning of the engagement, Hegemony weapons had been devastatingly effective against human ships. But as the battle progressed, human losses were decreasing while their accuracy was improving. They were learning faster than the ancient enemy could adapt. Admiral, Colonel Martinez called out, Hegemony flagship is moving to a new position. They're targeting the civilian evacuation ships from the outer colonies. Chen's expression didn't change, but something cold and dangerous flickered in his eyes. All human vessels implement Protocol Omega. Authorization Chun 77 Alpha Black. Zarathel watched as the human fleet suddenly changed its entire tactical posture. Ships that had been fighting defensively suddenly accelerated directly toward the hegemony lines, abandoning all attempts at self-preservation. "What's Protocol Omega?" she demanded. "Something we hoped we'd never have to use," Chin said quietly. "Total warfare. No restraints. No concern for acceptable losses. No rules of engagement beyond complete destruction of the enemy." The human ships weren't just attacking now, they were ramming. Vessels that had taken too much damage to continue fighting were accelerating to maximum speed and slamming into hegemony ships like guided meteors. The explosions lit up space like dying stars. "They're committing suicide," Zarathel breathed. "They're choosing how they die," Chin corrected. "There's a difference." Over the fleet communications, she could hear the final transmissions from human crews who had chosen to become weapons themselves. "This is Captain Morrison, UEF Defiant. Tell my kids their daddy helped save the galaxy." "Lieutenant Commander Park here. Hegemony vessel targeted. Ramming speed engaged. It's been an honor serving with you all. Ensign Rodriguez, UEF Salvation." "Mom, if you're listening, I love you. See you on the other side." Each sacrifice bought time and tactical advantage, but the cost was staggering. Zarathel had never seen a species so willing to die for a cause beyond their own immediate survival. "Chen, this is insane. You're going to lose your entire fleet." "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but we'll take them with us, and the next human fleet will know exactly how to kill them efficiently. That's how humanity fights existential threats. We make sure that even if we lose, our children win." A new voice cut through the communications. The hegemony commander, speaking in perfectly accented standard galactic. "Impressive sacrifice, humans. But ultimately futile. Surrender now, and we will grant you quick deaths." Chen activated the response channel. "Hegemony Command, this is Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Colonial Alliance. I have a counter-proposal. Speak, human. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of, and we'll let you keep your ships. Continue this attack, and we'll follow you home and burn your empire to ash." The hegemony response was immediate and contemptuous. "Your species numbered less than 50 billion before this engagement began. Our empire spans thousands of worlds. Your threat is meaningless." Chen's smile was absolutely terrifying. "That's where you're wrong. You see, you just made the mistake of threatening humanity's family. And now you're going to learn why no empire that targets human civilians survives contact with us." He turned to his communications officer. "Signal all human vessels. Begin transmitting the Icarus Protocol." Zarathel had never heard of the Icarus Protocol, but the effect on the human fleet was immediate. Every ship began broadcasting on a frequency that made her communication equipment screech with feedback. "What are you doing?" "Calling for help," Chin said. "That signal is being transmitted across every human communication network in the galaxy. Every human ship, every colony, every settlement is now receiving detailed tactical information about the hegemony, their location, their capabilities, and, most importantly, proof that they target civilians." The scope of what he was describing hit her like a physical blow. "You're mobilizing your entire species. Every ship, every pilot, every human with access to a weapon or a way to make one. The hegemony just declared war on 50 billion humans and everyone they care about." On the tactical display, new contacts began appearing at the edge of sensor range. Human ships arriving through jump points that shouldn't have existed. They came in dozens, then hundreds, merchant vessels hastily armed with kinetic weapons, civilian craft modified for ramming attacks, military ships that had been en route to other conflicts, and changed course the moment they received the Icarus signal. But they weren't just human ships. "Zarathel," Chun said, and his voice carried an odd note of wonder. look at the identification codes. She focused on the fleet designations scrolling across her screen and felt her breathing stop. Mixed among the human vessels were ships from dozens of other species. Some she recognized, many she didn't. "Those are Terran Alliance vessels," she whispered. "All those species that allied with humanity during the expansion wars." "Not allied," Chen corrected. "Adopted. When humans make friends, we don't just fight alongside you. We fight for you. And you fight for us." The communications channels erupted with voices from across the galaxy. "This is Captain Veltar of the Antaran Defense Force. The humans stood with us against the corporate consortium. We stand with them now." Kepler militia reporting. "Our colonies exist because human ships protected our evacuation fleets. We remember our debts. This is the Proxima Free Trade Association. Nobody threatens our human partners. Nobody." Ship after ship arrived, each adding their firepower to the growing fleet. But more than that, they brought something the hegemony clearly hadn't expected: tactical diversity. Every species had their own approach to warfare, their own technologies, their own ways of thinking about combat. "How many species are in your alliance?" Zarathel asked. "We stopped counting at 200, Chen admitted. "Humans have this habit of making friends everywhere we go. Sometimes we call it aggressive friendship." The hegemony fleet, which had seemed impossibly vast just hours ago, was now outnumbered by an alliance that spanned half the galaxy. But it was more than numbers. It was the realization that the humans hadn't just survived their ancient empire. They had thrived, made alliances, created something new. "Hegemony command," Chun said into the communications array. "Last chance. Withdraw now, or learn why the galaxy belongs to the living, not the dead." The response was pure rage. "Impossible. Inferior species cannot defeat the hegemony. We are eternal. We are supreme." "No," Chen said quietly. "You're nostalgic. And nostalgia dies when it meets evolution." He turned to Zarathel. "Wife, would you do me the honor of coordinating the Valdorian fleet with our new allies? It's time to end this." As she moved to establish communication links with the massive alliance fleet, Zarathel realized she was watching something unprecedented in galactic history. An ancient empire that had ruled through terror and technological superiority was facing an enemy they had never encountered before, a species that turned everyone they met into family, and then fought for that family with the fury of evolution itself. The hegemony had awakened, expecting to reclaim their empire. Instead, they had stumbled into contact with humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to make friends and keep them. "All vessels," Chun announced to the combined fleet. "This is Admiral Chun. Today we teach the galaxy that empires fall but families endure. Let's send these ghosts back to their graves." As the Alliance fleet moved to attack, Zarathel understood with crystalline clarity why Chen had been so calm about their marriage arrangement. He hadn't been gaining an ally. He had been adding one more species to humanity's ever-growing family. And the hegemony was about to learn what happened to those who threatened humanity's family. The Alliance fleet that assembled around the human ships was unlike anything recorded in galactic military history. Zarathel found herself coordinating between species she had only heard about in xenobiology classes, each bringing their own unique approach to warfare. The Crystalline Collective had arrived with ships that could phase in and out of normal space. The hive-minded Zenthri brought vessels that moved in perfect unison, sharing consciousness across their entire fleet. The Mechanical Intelligence, known as the Iron Assembly, contributed ships that could rebuild themselves mid-combat. "How did your species manage to form alliances with entities this diverse?" Zarathel asked Chun as they worked together to coordinate the massive fleet. Chun was simultaneously managing tactical data streams from over 300 different ship designs while maintaining communication with dozens of alien command structures. His ability to process information and maintain strategic awareness was beginning to seem almost inhuman. "We asked nicely," he said with that dry humor she was learning to recognize. "Then we backed up the request with trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and occasionally helping them fight off things that wanted to eat them. Admiral, Colonel Martinez interrupted, the hegemony is changing formation. They're pulling back toward a more defensive posture. On the tactical display, the ancient ships were indeed repositioning themselves. But rather than retreat, they seemed to be forming a complex geometric pattern that made Zarathel's eyes water to look it directly. They're activating something, she observed. Energy readings are off the scale. Chen's expression grew grim. Dr. Wright, any historical references for hegemony superweapons? The xenocultural specialist consulted his rapidly expanding database of hegemony technology. Several mentions in the archives. Something called the reality anchor, a device that can lock local space-time into a specific configuration. Essentially, they can make it impossible for matter or energy to exist in states they don't approve of. Meaning they can shut down fusion reactors, prevent chemical explosions, even stop electrical activity in biological nervous systems. If they activate it across this star system, every ship dies, Zarathel finished, and every living thing with it. The implications were staggering. A weapon that could simply decree that the fundamental forces of physics would stop functioning. It was the ultimate expression of hegemony philosophy. Reality itself should obey their will. How long until they can activate it? Chen asked. Based on energy buildup patterns, 18 minutes, Martinez reported. Around them, the bridge crew continued their work with professional calm, but Zarathel could sense the underlying tension. They were 18 minutes away from a weapon that could kill everything in the system without firing a shot. Options? Chun asked the room in general. We could scatter, Martinez suggested. Jump away, regroup in another system, and let them activate the reality anchor here, then move it to the next system we evacuate to, Chen replied. Eventually they'd corner us, somewhere we couldn't retreat from. Dr. Wright looked up from his console. There might be another option. The historical archives mention that the reality anchor requires enormous amounts of power and has to be calibrated for local space-time conditions. If we could disrupt the calibration process, introduce chaotic elements in a local space. The anchor works by imposing order on reality. If reality becomes too chaotic to predict, the device can't lock onto stable configurations. Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. Chaos we can do. Signal all Alliance vessels. Prepare for protocol entropy. What's protocol entropy? Zarathel asked. Something we developed for fighting AI opponents who try to predict our tactics through pattern analysis. We intentionally create maximum chaos across the battlefield. The orders went out across the Alliance fleet, and the results were immediate and disturbing. Ships that had been moving in coordinated formations suddenly began behaving in seemingly random ways. Some vessels started spinning while firing. Others began jumping in and out of hyperspace at unpredictable intervals. Several ships actually started ramming each other in carefully calculated collisions that somehow managed to avoid destroying either vessel. This looks like complete madness, Zarathel observed. That's because it is, Chun confirmed. Controlled madness, designed by humans who spent 3 years figuring out how to fight enemies with superior technology and predictive capabilities. But as she watched more carefully, Zarathel began to see the underlying patterns. The chaos wasn't truly random. It was mathematically complex in ways that would overwhelm any system trying to predict outcomes. Ships that appeared to be behaving insanely were actually following probability curves that made their actions simultaneously unpredictable and tactically effective. The hegemony reality anchor is beginning to destabilize, Dr. Wright reported. The calibration systems can't lock onto local space-time conditions because local conditions keep changing faster than they can process. On the tactical display, the geometric formation of hegemony ships began to waver. The perfect patterns they had maintained for millennia were being disrupted by the simple impossibility of predicting what the Alliance fleet would do next. Now, Chen said quietly, all ships, focus fire on the reality anchor array. Everything you've got. The Alliance fleet's attack was unlike anything Zarathel had ever witnessed. Every species brought their most devastating weapons to bear simultaneously. Valdorian crystal lances sliced through space alongside human kinetic projectiles. Crystalline collective phase weapons materialized inside hegemony hull armor. Zen-3 plasma streams merged with iron assembly particle beams. The reality anchor array, still struggling to calibrate itself against the chaos around it, took the full force of the attack before it could activate its defenses. The ancient technology that had once been capable of rewriting the laws of physics exploded in a burst of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. Direct hit, Martinez reported unnecessarily. Reality anchor is completely destroyed. But the celebration was short-lived. The destruction of their superweapon seemed to trigger something in the hegemony fleet. Their ships began moving with renewed purpose, and energy readings spiked across their entire formation. They're preparing for a final assault, Zarathel realized. All ships, maximum effort. No, Chen said firmly. There's something else happening here. He was right. The hegemony ships weren't moving to attack. They were arranging themselves into another geometric pattern, this one even more complex than before. What are they doing now? Colonel Martinez demanded. Dr. Wright's face had gone pale. According to these readings, they're preparing to activate something called the Final Protocol. It's mentioned in only one archive document. What does it do? It's a weapon of last resort. If the hegemony faces total defeat, they activate the Final Protocol. It destroys not just enemy fleets, but entire star systems. They'd rather render a region of space uninhabitable for millions of years than allow anyone else to control it. The scope of the threat was almost incomprehensible. They weren't just fighting for the survival of their fleets or their species. They were fighting to prevent the destruction of dozens of inhabited worlds. Time to activation? Chen asked. 7 minutes, Wright reported. Distance to minimum safe range for our ships? At maximum speed, 12 minutes. The mathematics were simple and terrible. The hegemony was about to destroy everything in a sphere of space roughly 3 light years in diameter, and the Alliance fleet couldn't escape in time. Admiral, came a voice over the communication array. It was Captain Veltar of the Antaran Defense Force. My people owe our existence to human protection. If this is our final battle, we are honored to fight it alongside you. Similar messages began flooding in from across the Alliance fleet. Species after species confirming their willingness to die rather than allow the hegemony to escape to threaten other worlds. Chun listened to each message, his expression growing more determined with every pledge of loyalty unto death. When the last transmission ended, he activated fleet-wide communications. Alliance vessels, this is Admiral Chun. The enemy is preparing to activate a system killer weapon rather than face defeat. They believe this makes them strong. They're wrong. His voice carried across the thousands of ships surrounding them with absolute conviction. They're about to learn the final lesson about why empires fall. They're about to discover what happens when a species that makes friends everywhere it goes gets really, truly angry. Zarathel looked at her husband and realized that despite everything they had already seen, despite all the tactical brilliance and controlled ferocity, the humans hadn't been fighting at full strength. They had been holding something back. Chun, she said quietly, what haven't you told me about your species? His smile was sharp as a crystal blade and twice as dangerous. That we don't just end empires, Zarathel. When someone threatens our family, we make sure their entire civilization becomes a cautionary tale told to children across the galaxy. As he spoke, new contacts began appearing on the sensors. Not Alliance ships this time, but something else entirely. Something that made the space around them ripple with energies that registered on instruments that weren't designed to detect them. What are those? Zarathel breathed. The real human fleet, Chun said simply. Everything you've seen so far was just the diplomatic core of the ships that emerged from hyperspace defied every law of physics Zarathel thought she understood. They didn't move through space so much as convince space to rearrange itself around them. They were larger than worlds and smaller than shuttlecraft simultaneously, existing in multiple dimensions at once. "Chun," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "what am I looking at?" "The Outer Fleet," Chun replied with quiet pride. "Humanity's real military. The ships you've been fighting were built for conventional warfare against conventional enemies. These were built for fighting gods." Dr. Wright was frantically consulting his databases, his face cycling through disbelief, terror, and awe. "Admiral, the energy signatures from those ships, they're not just using exotic matter, they're creating it. In real time. While moving. How is that possible?" Zarathel demanded. Chin's expression grew distant, thoughtful. "About a century ago, humanity made contact with something that lived between dimensions. Something old and vast and utterly alien. Most species would have run or try to worship it. We did what humans do. We made friends with it. On the tactical display, the impossible human ships were taking positions around the hegemony fleet. Their formations made the same kind of mathematical sense as the ancient enemy's patterns, but twisted through dimensions that regular minds couldn't fully process. You allied with extra-dimensional entities? We adopted them, Chun corrected. That's what humans do. We find intelligence, we make friends with it, we invite it to join the family. It doesn't matter if it's a species of crystalline beings or a collective consciousness or something that exists partially outside normal reality. The lead ship of the Outer Fleet opened communications. The voice that spoke was recognizably human, but carried harmonics that seemed to echo from somewhere beyond normal space. "Admiral Chun, this is Fleet Admiral Sarah Chun Vex of the UEF Probability Storm. We received your Icarus signal." "Sarah?" Chen's voice carried surprise and familial warmth. "I thought you were exploring the Andromeda Spiral." "We were. Turns out interdimensional travel is faster than we calculated. Also turns out the hegemony has been hiding in pocket dimensions, rebuilding their forces for thousands of years. They have fleets in 17 different dimensional layers." The information hit like a physical blow. The enemy they were fighting wasn't just the remnant of an ancient empire. It was the full strength of that empire, rebuilt and waiting in dimensions parallel to normal space. "How many ships?" Chen asked. "Roughly 50 million vessels across all dimensional layers, ranging from dreadnought class to mobile battle stations the size of small moons. They've been preparing for their return for a very long time." Zarathel felt her hope die. 50 million ships was beyond anything the Alliance could possibly fight, even with the impossible technologies of the Outer Fleet. But Chen just smiled. "Sarah, remember what Dad used to say about impossible odds. The bigger they are, the more satisfying it is to prove them wrong," came the immediate response. "Admiral, are you requesting a full-scale dimensional intervention?" "I am. Authorization Chun 77 Alpha Black Omega. Full family reunion protocols." What happened next broke Zarathel's understanding of warfare, reality, and the nature of existence itself. The Outer Fleet ships didn't just attack. They began rewriting the fundamental nature of the space around the hegemony forces. "What are they doing?" she managed to ask. "Dimensional engineering," Chen explained as casually as if he were discussing ship maintenance. "The Outer Fleet has learned to treat the boundaries between dimensions as suggestions rather than laws. They're collapsing the pocket dimensions where the hegemony has been hiding, forcing their entire fleet into normal space." The space around them began to ripple and tear. Through the tears, Zarathel could see glimpses of other realities, other dimensions where massive hegemony fleets waited in dark preparation. But as the Outer Fleet worked, those other dimensions were being systematically collapsed, their contents forced into the single dimension of normal space. Ships began appearing by the thousands. Ancient hegemony vessels, perfectly preserved and armed with weapons that had once conquered half the galaxy. The space around them became so crowded with enemy vessels that the tactical display couldn't properly render the scale. 50 million ships, Zarathel breathed. How can you possibly fight 50 million ships? Chen's answer came not in words, but in action. The outer fleet ships began to change, their impossible geometries shifting into configurations that hurt to look at directly. Reality around them began to behave strangely. Some hegemony ships found themselves existing in multiple locations simultaneously. Others discovered that their weapons were firing backwards through time. The thing about making friends with extra-dimensional entities, Chun said conversationally, is that you learn to think outside conventional reality. The hegemony has spent thousands of years preparing to fight a war in normal space using normal physics. They never considered that their enemies might have learned to ignore physics entirely. But even with reality-bending technology, the odds were still impossible. For every hegemony ship the outer fleet destroyed, 10 more took its place. The ancient empire's forces seemed endless, their weapons scoring hits that sent entire human ships spinning into non-existence. Chun, Zarathel said urgently, "You're still outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Even with dimensional manipulation, you can't win a war of attrition against these numbers." "You're right," Chun agreed. "Good thing we're not trying to win a war of attrition." On the communications array, a new voice spoke. This one carrying harmonics that suggested vast intelligence distributed across multiple layers of reality. "Admiral Chun, this is the collective consciousness of the transcended. We have been observing this conflict across 17-dimensional layers." "Transcended?" Zarathel asked. "Humans who chose to abandon physical existence and become pure consciousness," Chun explained. "They left the galaxy about 50 years ago to explore higher dimensions of existence." "Admiral," the Transcended continued, "the hegemony represents a threat not just to this dimension, but to the fundamental structure of reality itself. Their dimensional hiding places have been destabilizing the barriers between realities. If they continue to exist, they will eventually cause a cascade collapse that will destroy not just this universe, but all possible universes." "So what do you recommend?" Chun asked. "Complete extermination. Not just their fleets, but their entire dimensional infrastructure. We must ensure that this threat can never arise again." The conversation was interrupted by a transmission from the hegemony fleet. The voice was ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of millions of years of absolute authority. "Humans, you have fought well, but your resistance ends now. Surrender, and we will grant you quick deaths. Continue to resist, and we will ensure your species suffers for eternity." Chun activated the response channel, and when he spoke, his voice carried the backing of every human ship, every allied vessel, every impossible technology humanity had gathered in its journey across the galaxy. "Hegemony Command, this is Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Colonial Alliance, speaking for humanity and all our allies across every dimension of existence. We have a counter-proposal. Speak. Surrender now, dismantle your fleets, and retreat to whatever dying star spawned you. Do this, and we'll let you live long enough to see what the galaxy looks like when it's free of your influence." The hegemony response was immediate and filled with rage. "Impossible. We are eternal. We are supreme. We have conquered galaxies." Chen's reply was calm, almost gentle. "You were supreme. You did conquer galaxies. Past tense. Because you made one critical mistake in your calculations." "And what mistake was that?" "You assumed that because humanity is young, we would fight like a young species. You prepared for conventional tactics, conventional technologies, conventional limitations. You never considered that we might have spent the last century learning from species and entities that predate your entire civilization." As Chun spoke, the space around them began to change again. But this time, it wasn't just the outer fleet causing the distortions. Ships from across the Alliance began to reveal capabilities they had kept hidden. The Crystalline Collective phases their entire fleet into attack positions inside hegemony formations. The Zen-3 revealed they could share consciousness not just among their own species, but with any willing ally, creating a truly unified command structure. The Iron Assembly demonstrated that their mechanical minds could process tactical information at speeds that made reality seem to slow down. You see, Chun continued, when humans make friends, we don't just ally with them. We learn from them. We adapt their technologies, their ways of thinking, their approaches to existence itself. And then we teach them ours. The combined fleet began to move as a single entity, thousands of ships from hundreds of species coordinating their actions with a precision that no conventional command structure could achieve. They fought like a single organism with millions of specialized organs, each perfectly adapted to its role. The Valdorian Empire taught us precision and elegance, Chun said, and Zarathel felt a flush of pride despite the ongoing battle. The Crystalline Collective taught us to think in multiple dimensions. The Transcended taught us to exist beyond physical limitations. Every species we've met has made us more than we were. The Hegemony fleet, for all its vast numbers and ancient weapons, began to buckle under the assault. Their formations, perfect for fighting conventional enemies, couldn't adapt to opponents who shared consciousness, manipulated reality, and coordinated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But more than that, Chun continued, every species we befriended has learned from us. They've learned humans' stubborn refusal to give up, human willingness to die for strangers, human habit of turning every defeat into a lesson for future victory. The tide of battle was turning. 50 million hegemony ships were being systematically destroyed by a combined force a fraction of their size, because that smaller force fought with a unity and adaptability that the ancient empire had never encountered. You want to know why empires fall? Chun asked as the last major hegemony formation began to collapse. Because empires are built on the idea that some beings are superior to others. They create hierarchies, establish dominance, enforce submission. Around them, the Alliance fleet was methodically hunting down the last hegemony vessels, but doing so with a coordination that spoke of deep friendship and mutual respect between species. Families are different, Chun concluded. Families are built on the idea that everyone brings something valuable to the group. Everyone protects everyone else. Everyone learns from everyone else. And when you threaten a family, the last hegemony ship exploded in a burst of ancient fire. The entire family comes to defend itself. In the aftermath of the battle, as rescue operations began and the impossible human ships started folding space-time back to its normal configuration, Zarathel found herself alone with her husband in his ready room. Chun, she said quietly, when this alliance was formed, what were you really hoping to accomplish? He looked out the viewport at the Alliance fleet, ships from hundreds of species working together to rescue survivors and repair battle damage. Exactly this, he said. One more species joining the family. One more friend to learn from and teach. You mean the marriage was always intended to be permanent? Chin turned to look at her directly, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Genuine warmth, respect, and the beginning of something deeper. Zarathel, when humans make a commitment, we keep it. Political alliance or not, you're my wife, my partner, my family. If you'll have me. She thought about everything she had learned about humanity in the past day. Their terrifying competence in war, their impossible loyalty to friends, their habit of making family out of strangers, and then fighting for that family with the fury of evolution itself. I think, she said carefully, that my people could learn a great deal from yours. Good, Chin said with that warm smile she was learning to love. Because we're definitely going to learn a lot from yours. That's what families do. As their ships began the journey home, Zarathel reflected on the day she had married a human to stop a war and learned why his kind didn't just end empires. They built something better in their place. They built families that spanned the galaxy, and those families were stronger than any empire that had ever existed. The hegemony had awakened, expecting to reclaim their dominion over a galaxy of lesser species. Instead, they had discovered that those lesser species had grown up, made friends, and learned to fight as one unified family. And families, as they had learned too late, are far more dangerous than empires ever dreamed of being. Ambassador Zarathel stood before the massive viewport of her flagship, watching the human fleet maintain its formation just beyond the asteroid belt. For 3 cycles, the Valdorian Empire and humanity had been locked in a brutal war that was bleeding both civilizations dry. The humans had proven far more resilient than anyone in the Galactic Council had predicted. The sleek Valdorian cruisers, with their elegant curves and crystalline energy cores, looked almost delicate compared to the blocky, industrial human ships. Yet those ugly vessels had held their ground against superior technology for longer than any species in recorded history. The humans called them brick ships, crude, heavily armored, and seemingly held together with determination and stubbornness. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the human diplomatic vessel," her communications officer announced, his scale hands dancing across the control panel. Lieutenant Kex had served under her for 5 years, and she had never heard uncertainty in his voice until this war began. "Put it through," Zarathel replied, smoothing her ceremonial robes. As the lead diplomatic representative of the Valdorian Empire, she carried the authority to negotiate on behalf of Emperor Thane himself. This meeting could end the war that had already claimed millions of lives on both sides. The viewport shimmered and transformed into a communication screen. A human appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with short dark hair and eyes the color of deep space. He wore a simple military uniform, dark blue with minimal decoration. Admiral Marcus Chun, according to her briefing files. "Ambassador," Chun said with a slight nod. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "Admiral," Zarathel responded, studying his face for any sign of weakness. Humans were notoriously difficult to read, their emotions hidden behind masks of discipline. "My emperor grows weary of this conflict. Perhaps it is time we discuss terms." Chin's expression remained neutral. "We're prepared to discuss a ceasefire, but our terms are non-negotiable. Complete withdrawal of Valdorian forces from human space, recognition of our territorial sovereignty, and reparations for the colonies you've bombarded." The audacity of the request made Zarathel's spine stiffen. "You realize you're losing this war, Admiral? Our technology is superior. Our fleet outnumbers yours 3-1. And yet here we are 3 years later, and you're the one calling for negotiations." Chin's voice remained calm, but she caught something in his eyes. Not fear or desperation, but a quiet confidence that unsettled her. Before she could respond, her tactical officer's voice cut through the tension. "Ma'am, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures. Something's coming through the jump gate." Zarathel felt her blood chill. The jump gate that connected this system to the core Valdorian territories had been heavily fortified. Whatever was coming through had either destroyed those defenses or— "Admiral," Chun said, his voice suddenly sharp with concern. "Are you expecting reinforcements?" "No," Zarathel whispered, then louder, "Commander, identification of incoming vessels?" Her tactical officer's face had gone pale beneath his scales. "Ma'am, it's the hegemony. A full battle fleet. They're moving to attack positions." The hegemony, the ancient empire that had ruled half the galaxy before going dormant for centuries. If they had awakened and were moving against both human and Valdorian forces, Chin's image leaned forward. "Ambassador, I'm reading the same signatures. My xenobiology team confirms hegemony vessels, ancient design, but fully functional. Whatever's happening here, our war just became irrelevant." Zarathel watched as the dark ships emerged from the swirling energy of the jump gate. They were massive, geometric structures that seemed to absorb light itself. The hegemony had been legend, stories told to young Valdorians about the empire that had conquered worlds with technology that bordered on mystical. Ma'am, her communications officer said urgently, the hegemony fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies. The transmission crackled through the static, a voice that sounded like grinding metal and distant thunder. Inferior species. Your conflict disturbs the order. Submit to hegemony rule or face extinction. You have 1 solar day to comply. Chen's voice cut through her shock. Ambassador, with respect, we have a bigger problem than our territorial disputes. My intelligence suggests the hegemony views both our species as pests to be eliminated. Zarathel looked at the tactical display, showing 3 distinct fleets, Valdorian, human, and the growing hegemony formation. Her empire's ships were the most advanced, sleek vessels powered by crystalline technology that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. The human ships looked crude in comparison, metal boxes with primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons. But the hegemony ships, they defied easy categorization. Some were larger than small moons, others twisted through space in ways that hurt to look at directly. Admiral, she said slowly, what do you propose? Temporary alliance. Pool our resources, share intelligence. Fight them together until we can figure out how to send them back to whatever hole they crawled out of. Her advisors would call it treasonous. The Emperor had specifically ordered the complete subjugation of humanity. But, looking at those alien geometries moving with impossible grace through space, Zarathel realized that pride might be a luxury they could no longer afford. There would need to be formal agreements, she said carefully. Treaties, guarantees. There's another option, Chen said, and something in his tone made her focus completely on his face. A personal guarantee between our peoples. Something that would carry weight in both our cultures. What kind of personal guarantee? Chen was quiet for a long moment. A marriage alliance. You marry a human representative. I marry a Valdorian one. Create bonds between our species that go beyond politics. The suggestion was so outrageous that Zarathel's first instinct was to laugh. Marriage between species was not unheard of in the galaxy, but between enemies? During a war? Yet as she looked at the hegemony fleet beginning to separate into attack formations, she realized that conventional solutions might not be enough. The Valdorian Empire had detailed records of the last hegemony expansion. Entire civilizations had simply vanished. You would be willing to marry one of my people, she asked. If it means saving both our species, yes. The question is whether you'd be willing to do the same. Zarathel closed her eyes, thinking of her duty to her people, to her empire. When she opened them, Admiral Chun was still watching her with that unsettling calm confidence. Very well, she said. I will marry a human representative. But know this, Admiral. If this is some elaborate deception, if you betray this alliance, I will personally ensure your species remembers the error for whatever brief time they have left. Chen nodded seriously. Understood. I'll marry your designated representative under the same terms. As if summoned by their agreement, another voice cut through the comm channels, this time from the hegemony fleet. Inferior species, your time decreases. 18 hours remain for compliance. Admiral, Zarathel said, who did you have in mind for this marriage alliance? Chen's smile was small, but genuine. Actually, Ambassador, I was thinking the alliance would work best if the highest-ranking representatives from each side took the pledge. That would be you and me. The statement hung in the space between their ships like a challenge. Marry the enemy admiral to save both their peoples from an ancient threat that made their current war look like a children's game. Zarathel looked once more at the hegemony ships, their impossible angles cutting through space with deadly purpose. Her people had always prided themselves on their logic, their ability to make rational decisions under pressure. Very well, Admiral Chun, I accept your proposal. When and where do you suggest we conduct this ceremony? My ship can dock with yours in 6 hours. We can have the ceremony performed by representatives from both our cultures, broadcast to both fleets. Make it official. As the communication ended, Zarathel stared out at the 3 fleets positioned for what could be the last battle any of them would ever fight. In 6 hours, She would marry a human she had met only moments ago, allying with a species she had been trying to destroy just to face a threat that dwarfed them all. Her aide, a young Valdorian named Lyra, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, are you certain about this course of action?" Zarathel touched the ceremonial blade at her side, a symbol of her family's honor and her authority as an imperial ambassador. "No, Lida, but I'm certain that conventional approaches won't work against the hegemony. Sometimes survival requires choices that seem impossible." As her ship began moving toward the rendezvous point with Chin's vessel, Zarathel wondered what kind of man she was about to marry, and what kind of war they were about to fight together.